The first time since his assassination, the widow of conservative activist Charlie Kirk gives a public statement. Erica Kirk vowed to carry on her husband's work and says the campus tour he was on when he was shot will continue. She also thanked law enforcement for tracking down the suspect and praised the work of first responders.
I want to thank the first responders who struggled heroically to save Charles's life, and the police who acted bravely to make sure that there were no other victims on that terrible afternoon.
Police say the suspect, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, turned himself in at the urging of his father, who recognized him from those widely circulated photos and video. Robinson is now in jail without bond. The Utah County Attorney's Office says it plans to file formal charges next week. The rise in political violence has public officials and everyday Americans on edge. Why are these incidents continuing to occur, and what needs to be done to stop the violence? Here to talk to us about that is Luke Baumgartner, research fellow at the program on extremism at George Washington University. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us why our country is seeing this rise in political violence.
Well, I think we have to chalk it up to a couple of reasons. First is just the general sense of alienation and failure that a lot of people have felt with regards to larger systems in place. So people no longer feel that politics works for them traditionally. They see that they're not being heard, their needs aren't being met, and at the end of the day, when their elected representatives or their appointed government officials across all levels of government, when they feel that they no longer are looking out for them, they feel like they need to take matters into their own hands in order to be seen, in order to be heard. And when that happens, that's when we start ending up with acts of violence like this.
And what, in your opinion, do you think needs to be done to stem this kind of behavior?
Well, unfortunately, law enforcement can't be everywhere all the time. And if they were, we'd have a larger constitutional crisis on our hands. So every threat can't be mitigated, and I know that's sort of a disappointing answer, but that's basically how we should look at it, is that it's unfortunate that not every threat can be looked at under a microscope, and usually the loudest voices and the ones that are making the most noise aren't the ones that are committing these acts of violence. As we've seen with, the previous assassination attempt on President Trump back in Butler, Pennsylvania, the individual had a very minimal online footprint, and that's kind of what we're seeing with this alleged suspect in the shooting of Charlie Kirk. So it's really difficult to kind of act in a minority report style way and try and, intercept these threats before they act.
I'm wondering, what role do you think leaders play in this rise in this kind of violence? After the Kirk shooting, we saw a lot of blame going toward the left. We saw the president saying that it was the fault of the left. Do you feel that that was a constructive response?
No, and for a couple of reasons. First is that the data just doesn't bear that out. You can look at any number of, really rigorous studies carried out at the University of Maryland or the Center for Strategic and International Studies that show the exact opposite, that most of the political violence in the United States has been perpetrated by the far right. And the last time that you would look at numbers and see anything resembling the quote-unquote far left outweighing the political violence of the far right would probably be the 1970s, during the days of rage and, basically the heyday of the far left. So that's not constructive because it just isn't true. And second, all it takes is somebody with a grievance and a gun to basically take that permission slip from elected leaders and elected officials calling for this sort of retribution and vengeance to go out and carry out another act like this.
And now we've seen congressional leaders canceling their public events out of fear for their own safety. Do you think that the continuation of these kinds of shootings could negatively impact public discourse and even interest in people running for public office?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen some of the highest levels of threats towards public officials in the last few years. The U.S. Capitol Police has put out numbers multiple times stating that, this is the highest level that they've seen in decades. Judges are constantly getting threats of violence or public harassment. And quite frankly, if I was an elected official, I would probably be in the same position where I'd be apprehensive about appearing in public without a massive security presence. So this really kind of puts a damper on the way that representative officials and other politicians can interact with their constituents.
Yeah. One final point here, and that is with these tech companies, when you consider that young men are often carrying out these kinds of acts of violence after becoming radicalized online, should tech companies be held more accountable? Do you think there's a need for increased regulation?
So you have to kind of look at it this way, between what is and what ought to be. What is true is that tech companies basically have a free rein to do whatever they want, and they will care about their bottom line and will care about creating shareholder value over the value of public safety. So unless there is serious political will to actually rein these tech companies in, talking Meta, Discord, and any of the other big social media apps, then nothing will really change until we actually have the political will and we have the senior leaders at those companies actually willing to submit themselves to increased regulation.
All right, that is Luke Baumgartner. He is a research fellow at George Washington University. Thank you so much for joining us today.